Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Linda, and I'm originally from Michigan, now living in the St. Louis metro area. I'm a college coach with School Match for You and have a daughter at University of Chicago.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters, Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy has a bachelor's degree from the University of Georgia and a master's degree from North Carolina State University. She works in private practice in Raleigh as a mental health therapist. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. Good morning, friends. I had a great week. Sensational, I would even go so far as to say. Several things happened this week that have me fired up. My niece, Catalia, had an 8-pound, 10-ounce girl. Now, this is my sister's daughter. So my sister's a grandma and my mom's a great-grandma. Pretty exciting. No grandkids at all in our family like this. Catalia will be visiting us in August for 4 days, which we're excited about. And first she's planning all these trips. She's going to see Karis and Joy in Durham. Then she's going, my wedding gift to them, she's only been married for a year and a half, is to go to Myrtle Beach. She's going there. Then she's coming to us. And I was thinking, how's she getting all this time off? Because she's a teacher. She's a French teacher, just like her mom. They're both French teachers. And then I thought, snap, that's the difference. One of the differences between Canada and the U.S. She gets a year and a half for maternity leave. Can you believe it? It's a new law in Canada that just passed. So here she has been teaching 2 years. And they just extended maternity from 12 months to 18 months. So very European. As an aside, if I ever mention a relative, just assume they're an educator. Karis, my oldest daughter, she was a Spanish teacher, middle and high school. Now she has a Spanish tutoring business. My sister is a French teacher. My niece is a French teacher, Norm's daughter, and a math tutor. My mom was an elementary teacher. My dad was a chemistry teacher and assistant principal. My grandmother was an educator. So I guess I was just destined for education. Some families do doctors, some do business people. Some do attorneys. Our family, 70% of them are educators, except for my brother. And you may be thinking, hey, you never mentioned your youngest daughter, Joy. I have a real cool story to share about Joy. So my dad's sister, she was in public health, and she graduated from UNC Chapel Hill with a master's in public health in 1974. And she used to tell us all of these stories about what it was like being one of the first Black women ever to go to University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And just sort of how that white male faculty just didn't know how to handle her because my Aunt Betty is very outspoken. So now fast forward 50 years later, and my daughter Joy works at University of North Carolina, Chapel. She's not in public health. She's in the Keenan Flagler Business School, but same school 50 years later. Just kind of a neat story. So let me get back to why this week was so special. So I did 2 college visits. And I'll mention a little bit more about both of them a little bit later on. I did a college counselor fly-in program to Memphis, to Rhodes College. Sometimes when you do these college counselor fly-in programs, and it's one of the perks about being a college counselor is that these schools fly you in. But sometimes they're in big groups like 50, sometimes they're small groups like 12. This was like a one-on-one, and those are my favorite. You just meet with a lot of senior leaders, you sit in class, you just imbibe the place. Just helps you refine your skills at knowing who to refer. And it was just an A++ trip. And then I visited a couple of my pre-med students. I literally been back about 45 minutes from doing that. And I'm recording this on Sunday at Emory at Oxford, one from Florida, one from New Jersey. And I was there for the last 4 hours. And I'll just say a little bit more about that later on as well. Both trips were awesome. Finally, I've never had contact lenses. I've never had glasses. But I'll be meeting with my students and they're about to show me an essay. And I'm like, can you increase the font? About 125. Why don't we go 150? And I finally decided to break down and get glasses. That's right, glasses. And the reason I'm excited about this is I picked out glasses just like my dad has. And it's kind of a little bit of tribute to my dad. And also when I put them on, I was like, whoa, this is pretty cool. I could see so much better. So that's kind of exciting for me as well. So a few announcements, and then we'll get into today's episode. So Karen Christoph is the Assistant Vice President at Colorado College and the Dean of Admissions. She's a 37-year vet. She worked at Sarah Lawrence College in the 80s, Bennington College in Vermont in the 90s, early 90s, Grinnell College in Iowa in the mid and late 90s, and then Smith College for over 20 years, from 1999 till the end of 2019. And she's in year 5 here at Colorado College. And she's somebody who I reach out to when I don't know an answer to a question. She's just a fountain of knowledge. You know, we have Hillary Dickman on the podcast a couple times a year. In fact, Hillary will be part of a 3-part series we're doing coming up this Thursday on Common App Activity section. And, you know, I've known Hillary since before she started working at Colorado College. And I once said to Hillary, how did you become so knowledgeable so fast, Hillary? She's like, look who my mentors are, Karen Christoph and Matt Bonser. I get to work with them every day. Well, you'll get to take advantage of all of Karen's knowledge if you sign up for our upcoming 1-hour Q&A session with Karen Christoph. And it is only 9 days away. Just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com, hit the events page. You'll see a real brief sign-up form. Put down any questions you have. Send in those hard, perplexing questions because she can handle them. And there's a place on the form for your questions. And if you don't have any questions, just be a fly on the wall and listen to the questions others have. Remember, knowledge is power. Final announcement. We don't have a sign-up sheet up yet, but we will by next Monday's episode. And Lisa and Linda are doing their parent version of the outstanding presentation they did at our regional admission conference for college counselors. They're just tweaking it to target it to parents. It's on parent anxiety. It's going to be on Thursday, May 30th at 8:30 Eastern, 7:30 Central, 6:30 Mountain, and 5:30 Pacific. So just put that on your calendar right now, and we'll have the sign-up form up by next week. The only reason we don't have that up now is we're switching to webinar software. It's a slightly different process. We'll be using webinar software for that, but you want to put that on your calendar. So on today's episode, I'm going to say a little bit more about the problems the FAFSA fiasco is creating. You know, we certainly had Michael Keaton and Julia. We did an interview about the chaos and the FAFSA delay. But so much has changed since that. It has gotten so much worse that I don't feel it's sufficient to just leave it at that one episode 2 months ago and not give an update of what's going on with the FAFSA. So I want to say something about that. I'm also going to say something on the tumult on college campuses that are just embroiled in chaos, unlike anything I can ever remember. I certainly remember in the 80s, there was a lot of protest around South Africa and the U.S. investment in South Africa and the call for divestiture. I remember that, but this is at a different level. This seems reminiscent of the 60s with the Vietnam War and the civil rights and all the tumult that was on campuses and the protests and uprisings. I wasn't around back then. I just tried to be a student of history. So I need to say something about that. I've been silent for a while, and I don't want to be silent anymore because silent is consent. And then I'll have just a few brief comments on my 2 days in Memphis, Tennessee, at Rhodes College on Thursday and Friday, and then my my time at Emory 4 hours earlier today, and just share a few insights from those trips. And then we'll have part 2 of Lisa's outstanding interview with Elizabeth Hamlet, an expert in helping students with disabilities successfully transfer to college. All right, well, let's dive in with the FAFSA. So, you know, we talked about the delays that had been happening with the FAFSA simplification, the new rollout of it, and the problems it was creating in the interview Julie and I had with Michael Keaton. Well, those delays continued to persist, and they got worse and worse and worse, and there were more and more delays. But that's not the only problem. There's also an unusual number of errors, both on student forms and in the education department's eligibility calculations. So I'm going to draw heavily from an Inside Higher Ed article Liam Knox ran about a week and a half ago. that talks about some of these things. So here's some quotes from the article. This year's wave of FAFSA corrections is so much larger than usual. It threatens to overwhelm financial aid offices. Up to 16% of the 7 million free application for federal student aid or FAFSA forms submitted so far include student errors. 16%, it's 1 in 6, and require corrections. And that was what the education department announced. Way more than usual. We've had John Bockenstadt on our podcast. Here's a quote from him. We're seeing much higher error rates from students. Bockenstadt, Vice Provost for Enrollment Management, Oregon State, said. He didn't have exact numbers, he said, but it seems to be 3 to 4 times as many errors than previous years. Bill DeBond, Senior Director of Data and Strategic Initiatives at National College Attainment Network, NCAN, did have numbers. He said in a typical year, FAFSA submission rates are about 7% higher than completion rates. And that's a gap made up largely of forms of errors. This year, the gap is 30%. And by the way, sometimes if you listen to very well-resourced schools talk, they may not make it sound like this year is that atypical. If they're using the CSS profile to drive a lot of their calculations, or if they're using institutional forms. But for the vast majority of schools out here, this is a really big deal. It's a really big deal. And as I talk to school leaders, this year they're finding it to be just particularly troublesome. I think they thought they'd come out of the COVID bout and only to get whacked again, right in the face. And it's a lot of things. It's the SCOTUS decision and adjusting to that. It's certainly the FAFSA fiasco. It's also the enrollment cliff. It's the war on college. It's the fear of recession and the rising cost of college. It's kind of all of it coming together. And then it's students applying to way and way more schools, making it even harder to yield the students that you're interested in. And all those things are things that a lot of times boards don't understand. Okay, here's some more quotes from this article. We need to turn these submissions into completions. It would be tragic to lose students so far along the process because we couldn't get them over the finish line. John Fansmith, Senior VP of Government Relations for the American Council of Education, said, the volume of corrections bodes very poorly for low-income students in particular. Mistakes are more likely from low-income students who do not have someone to walk them through the process, he said. But even most counselors are in the dark because this form is new. It's a recipe for disaster. Student errors aren't the only mistakes gumming up the works. So you think, okay, it's bad, delay. And with the new form, there are more student errors. That's really bad. Well, in the past few weeks, it has been made very clear that there are also calculation errors from the Department of Education, meaning nearly 20% of the institutional student records, what's known as ISARs, I-S-I-R. So what happens is when you go on and complete a FAFSA, you can go into your portal and see your student aid index. Well, the college gets what's known as an ISAR. It's the institutional version. 20% need to be reprocessed before accurate aid information can be sent out. So colleges are getting inaccurate information. In many cases, they sent packages out with inaccurate information that have to be retracted. Karen McCarthy, Vice President of Public Policy and Federal Relations at the National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators, NAFSFA, said that together, the student corrections and the department-level miscalculations have made an already challenging financial aid year far more complicated. They're all kind of getting added together into the category of problem FAFSAs that we cannot issue an aid offer for, she said. Most years, the vast majority of ISARs come in clear. They don't need more work. This year, the ISARs are coming back funkier. And so the process is more time intensive, and we just don't have that time. She added that one of the questions, it's question number 8 actually on the form, and it's really stymied a lot of applicants. So this is a question that asks students, are they interested in a direct unsubsidized loan? Now that might seem simple, but that's tech talk. And back when I used to do charter school work at KIPP, the L word was a word that really produced agina, and L is in loan. I mean, people would recoil just reflexively. In some cases, parents had been burned by student loans, still had a lot of loan debt. But you ask people, do you want a direct unsubsidized loan? They either don't know what it is or they're scared of it. And they never used to ask that question. So that's leading to all kinds of FAFSA incompletions. It's really a problem. And I just don't know how in the world that wasn't tested by a group of college counselors, especially maybe ones that work with more Pell Grant students, because they would have immediately triggered that. It's completely befuddling to me that question could get through, whatever quality control process they have. So they recently have gotten rid of the guy. He's taken the fall, who's over the whole thing after 3 years, but that's not going to do anything to help this year. And I have a feeling that it's not just one person's fault. The sheer volume of corrections isn't a looming disaster on its own. In a normal year, even a surge in errors would be manageable because they can be addressed almost as soon as the FAFSA is open, she said. But this year, students weren't able to make corrections until recently. For months, they couldn't make corrections. So they've just been piling up, flag for errors, no immediate avenue for recourse. The biggest issue with these higher number of rejected FAFSAs is there's no corrections open. So none of them could be fixed. Even the minor, relatively small fixes, says McCarthy. So it's just been a problem everywhere you look at it, all the way around. Students in FAFSA, forum contributors may be able to correct availability for brief periods, but then all of a sudden you get an error message again. Here's another quote from Backenstadt. It worked for a few hours this morning and then it went down for the day, he said Thursday night. He added, this experience gave him and other financial aid administrators a sense of deja vu. When the new FAFSA itself went online late December, it was also unfinished. And the department also called it a soft launch, and it was shut down for maintenance for many hours. And, here's a few more comments that have come out from a couple other sources that I want to just read just to show how bad it is. And then we'll transition to our next topic for the day. So these are not from that article, but they're from another source. Additionally, U.S.-born students whose parents are born in the country illegally and lack a social security number have struggled to complete the form, which until March, it wouldn't allow their parents to fill it out at all. In a separate problem, parents in the country illegally are unable to pull in tax data from the IRS, requiring them to enter it manually. Combined, the issues have caused FAFSA completion rates to plunge. Just 33% of high school class of 2024 has completed the aid form, and that's a 29% drop compared to the same time last year. And that's according to National College Attainment Network. The network estimates as many as 700,000 fewer high school students might submit a FAFSA compared to last year. And that would translate to a 4% drop in college enrollment across the country. That's the biggest drop since the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's really impacting low-income and first-generation students. So Cordray, who was the former head of Consumer Protection Bureau, and he was in the chief operating officer role until basically June, and then he's done. But once again, I talked recently to someone who's not even convinced the problems are going to be fixed next year. So they really messed up. They should have just extended the old process for at least another year while they worked out the kinks, but it is what it is. So here we are. All right, so let's transition and talk about the next topic. And this is something that I think about every single week, and that's what's happening on college campuses right now. And so I want to just make a few introductory comments about this, and then not going to do a comprehensive dive in at all. But here's what I want to do. I want to apologize to you as listeners because this is a topic that really warranted significant conversation over the last 2 months. The Palestinian-Israel conflict on campuses boiled over to college campuses. The tension is at fever pitch, biggest imbroglio I can remember. We pride ourselves in talking about the tough stuff, on not ducking issues on this podcast. But it's been crickets from YCBK on the biggest issue roiling college campuses arguably since the 60s. And silence is consent. So why the silence? Does that mean we're proving what's going on? Not at all. I'm just being really transparent with you. I don't feel I have enough knowledge to understand the complexity of the issues to give an insightful, well-informed explanation of what's going on without stepping in it and saying something that's ignorant or offensive. Not afraid to talk about the tough conversations. You've heard us have tough conversations on test scores, affirmative action, and many, many things. Now, the Future You podcast had an expert on this week, and I thought that was pretty good. Dave and Norm, they are, all three of us are in this text message group, and they are so much more fluent about these issues that either one of them could probably talk about this much more intelligibly than I can. I'm more limited to domestic politics. And I thought about bringing in an expert on it, but then once again, that Future You podcast ran a pretty good episode. Douglas Belkin has a pretty good article up today in the Wall Street Journal. It's worth checking out. And I really thought Fareed Zakaria's show on CNN today, by the way, Sunday, that was the best I'd heard at a conversation that was a debate from two different sides that were where people communicated in a respectful way. Because I don't understand who's right and who's not. And Muslims say when they say from the river to the sea, they're arguing for equality for all. Jews say they're calling for their extinction. I don't know who's right. You just don't have enough knowledge. When I was at CMC, Claremont McKenna, their president, Hiram Chadosh, he talked about how hard it is as a president to draw the line between free speech, hate speech, and intimidation. And I actually talked to him afterward, and I secured a commitment for him to come on our podcast and talk about this. I thought that'd be a really interesting conversation for you guys to hear. And I just hadn't followed up with him. I don't know if he will still come on now after seeing presidents getting fired, talking about this issue. I think most people are probably pretty risk averse, but I'm still planning on following up. I do have a few observations, though, about this that I feel I can speak on. So personal qualities have always been extremely valuable in a holistic admission process, extremely valuable. They've never been more valuable than now. And I'm convinced in 2025, when the custom questions come out on the Common App, or if schools have their own app online, any custom questions, you're going to see a whole new set of questions. Because I saw a lot this year. There's going to be even more next year. You're going to see prompts that, remember, these prompts are used to do a couple things. They're used to identify people who are consistent with the values of the college, and to identify people who the college feels it needs more of. They're intentionally done to do that. I mean, they serve other purposes as well, but that's one of the big purposes they serve. And I'm convinced you're going to see a whole slate of questions that are going to come out that are going to design to suss out whether students can live amicably in community with people who are very different from themselves and build constructive relationships. No doubt in my mind. And I'm experiencing a lot, a lot of feedback from students. A Jewish student I worked with at the University of Michigan, I talked to her. At first, it was going great. Next thing I know, they're hiring a security guard. Hillel has been threatened, and they need security. Another student I worked with talked about how the president's office has been taken over at the highly selective liberal arts school that she's at, and she's wondering if she should transfer. And so there's no doubt. One thing I do know, there's a tremendous amount of anti-Semitism, and there's also a tremendous amount of Islamophobia. And I don't really see people attempting to understand why people feel so strongly the way they do. And when you don't see any attempt for people to understand why one group feels the way they do, it's kind of a recipe for chaos. And I'm not trying to both sides it here. I'm just saying what I believe, that unless you see a greater attempt to understand why the feelings of passion and hurt and pain run so deep, then you're likely to see an imbroglio like we have now just intensify. So I don't have the answers. If I had more answers, I would have more commentary. But I do feel silence is consent, and it's so bad now, I didn't want to ignore the situation anymore. Where's the line between free speech and hate speech and intimidation? I don't know. Is bringing in the police to rein in people that have violated campus policies correct and direct and forceful action? Or are people being mischaracterized because outside agitators who are pro-Hamas are saying things and students are being accused of that, and then you've only aggravated the situation and therefore intensified the emotion? These are things I don't know. I'm trying to understand them, and I just didn't feel I had enough answers and guidance, but I just felt it's too big of a deal on these college campuses to not at least bring it up and say, I feel terrible for the Jewish students and the anti-Semitism and the fear that they're experiencing. I have many students I work with, and they're afraid to go to college campuses. And I also know Islamophobia is real. And you had a past president who literally was calling to ban Muslims from the country. And so there's a lot of anger, still deep-seated anger that's directed there. And that community often feels completely ignored and not listened to and just devalued and dehumanized. So it's really difficult. College campuses are a microcosm of society. What happens in society trickles down into the college campus. All right, briefly, I had a stay at Rhodes College, which is as beautiful as any school in the country. The Gothic architecture is striking. The limestone and the slate roofs, reminiscent of the Duke's West Campus, maybe even more beautiful. And if you're interested in being a doctor, this school is unbelievable. It really is. If you want to be a doctor, you can go to a place like Rhodes and you can do research at St. Jude's Hospital, the only undergraduate school that has a partnership with St. Jude's Hospital. And hundreds of people work there. Many of these positions are paid. It obviously looks amazing on a medical school resume. They have more than double the acceptance rate for med schools in the country. And they got the Memphis Zoo there. They have more than 4 times the acceptance rate of the vet school in the country. And students are eligible by auto merit for $15,000 to $40,000 in merit money. So you can get an amazing undergraduate education with an average class size of 14 in a beautiful setting and possibly coming out paying under $40,000 for that type of individual personal attention. Just an underrated gem. And here's an epiphany that I had when I was on the campus. You know, so many times students rule out states because they're either too blue or they're too red, especially if they have strong views on politics. And I've been fairly sympathetic to that in the past. But I had an epiphany when I was on this campus because 99% of the time you're on the actual campus. So if you're off campus, you're usually with students from the campus. And I was told from somebody in the know that Rhodes voted 85-15 Democratic in the last election. So you could say Tennessee, no, it's a red state, get me out of there. Or you could say 7 out of 8 students there don't think the way people think of when they think of Tennessee, and that's the environment that you're in. And you could say the same on the opposite side. Michigan usually goes blue. 1 in the last 8, actually. And but Hillsdale is very red. So the politics of the campus really should be people's concern for those who are concerned about the mentality and the ideology of the people around them, especially if you have strong views either way on that issue. And so, listen, I can't say it's a complete non-factor, the views of the state, but overwhelmingly, it's the perception, it's the perspective on the campus that should matter. And I really believe that. And I just had that epiphany after being. And I feel bad because I had a family that was pretty progressive from the Pacific Northwest that had visited Rhodes. And I was like, you're pretty progressive. It's Tennessee. I'm not sure if it's the best match. And I'd been to Rhodes before, but not the deep dive like I did this time. And I came away thinking, I kind of gave that family bad advice. So it's just a little bit of my own evolution in my thinking. And then as for Emory, once again, this is Emory Oxford. And small classes, both my students that are there are pre-med. One student told me 40% of students are pre-med. The other one told me more than half the students are pre-med. My one student told me her classes have been as small as 7 and as high as 24. And they both are really glad that they're at Emory Oxford. And then they'll spend the last 2 years at Emory Atlanta. They said they know their teachers know them. They're in small classes, good learning environment. Listen, not for everybody. Okay, it's a more remote location, but both of them said free of distractions, small classes, great education. I wouldn't want to be here for all 4 years, but you start out 2 years at Oxford, then they get 2 years of Atlanta with the small classes and the great learning environment. So I just think it's something people need to think more about. Beautiful, beautiful campuses. And I had 3 great days this week spending time there. All right, we'll transition to Lisa's excellent interview with Elizabeth Hamlet.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, in part 2 of 3 of Lisa's interview with Liz Hamlet on how students can successfully transition to college if they have disabilities. Liz explains why students choose not to list their disabilities with the college. Liz talks about what skills students need to have at home for a successful college transition. Liz talks about why assignment calendars are important. Liz continues to talk about what disability services are not provided at college and how they differ from what a high school provides. Liz talks about how a student with a disability can provide a good college fit. Liz and Lisa talk about the problems that are created when the parent wants the student to take advantage of disability services, but the student doesn't take ownership of their own need for these services. Listen and enjoy.
Think about it from our point of view. If you fill out our form and your student is not involved at all, we're going to go through a process. We're going to read their reports. We're going to make a decision. And then, the way that this gets communicated back to the student, usually it's by email. It may be by phone call. It all depends. But if your student's not involved, why would we even do this? Because we're going to go through this process. And if we've never even talked to them, what makes you think they're going to use those accommodations? And, students have a part in it. So things happen in a variety of different ways. A lot of my colleagues have this, there are a couple of sort of brand name programs that colleges can buy to manage all the information for a DS office. And so when I interviewed folks for the book, some of them said, we send an email or a notification and it says, it's the start of the semester. First of all, if you're still here, because we're not sure if they are, that's a big change, right? We're not responsible for knowing whether students have left school. If you're still here, log into our system. Let us know which professors you want notified, because some of my colleagues don't notify everybody without students' permission, and also lets them choose which accommodations they want each professor to know about. So that may not be the case everywhere. Sometimes my colleagues just generate a letter that gets emailed, but often students have a part to play. So either they, forward the email, or they, log in and they press the button to send those notifications to their professors. So, they have to be involved in this. And, what's really important is, if I can take a moment, I do try to wedge this into all of my interviews. The research points to numerous reasons why students don't register with us when they come to college. One of them is that they don't want people to know about their disability. They want a fresh start, however they, perceive this issue. So again, 4,000 colleges, can't be sure about everybody, but I'd be very surprised if any of my colleagues says on that notification what your student's disability is. And that is a question that students can ask while they're looking at colleges. It's really important to know that we are not going to disclose that information to your professors. You can choose to do so if you like, but we won't do it, because we want them to, we want to give them every possible motivation to register with us.
Right. And I think that's important for students to feel like that they have some sort of control over who has what information about them.
Yeah.
And knowing that the letter just says this is the accommodation, it doesn't say why, that would probably encourage more students to use their accommodations. So we have these students. What kind of skills do students with disabilities kind of need to develop before they start college? And how can their parents help them do this?
So, I think what's important about these conversations is to bring it back to the skills that all college students need, because in many ways, everybody is making this big shift when they come to college. They've gone from, most of them, living at home, having a very structured life, where they go to this one building for a couple of hours a day, and they shift between classrooms, but they're in that building all day. And then depending on what happens for them after school, they go to work, they go to practice, they, do whatever. Often there is somebody there providing dinner, so they know when that's going to happen. And then somebody kind of says, all right, it's time to go to sleep. And I recognize students are coming to us from all different experiences, but it is very structured. And so when they get to us, again, the student body as a whole, they have 15 hours a week if they're taking 5 classes where they know where they're supposed to be, and the rest of the time is up to them. So that is why time management is something that comes up all the time. So again, you can't really replicate this experience with a high school kid because they're going to be in that building all day, right? But talking to them about the weekends and what they have to do, and having them be, thinking ahead to, okay, if I have to clean my room and I have a paper to write, it's Friday afternoon. When am I going to do this? Even better would be to be thinking about it Thursday, because if they want to use Friday night to do something, that leaves them literally less time to do this work. There are neat things. So I'm getting ahead of myself because it's just time management all the time, right? So keeping up with current work, right? Because you've got readings to do, problem sets to do every week, and then the long-term stuff you have to layer on to that. So there are these neat things called assignment calculators, and for some reason, university library sites seem to host these. And you log in, or you don't have to log in, I'm sorry. You just go in and you say, I'm going to start my paper on this date. I'm going to finish it on this date. It's brilliant. And then the one that I like gives you options in a drop down. Are you doing a research essay? Is it an argumentative, an analysis, whatever. And then you hit go, and it produces a schedule with breakdowns, with interim deadlines to meet over that time. And so students don't even have to break this stuff down for themselves. They just have to, plug it in. Now, what they do have to do is meet those deadlines, get those on their calendar.
Do what the paper says, right? That's the tricky part usually.
When we talk about the differences, a lot, when I say a lot, I don't have stats on this, and I apologize. I usually preface this, but my experience is anecdotally that a number of students with disabilities have been accommodated in high school with extended time to finish work outside of class. So, papers, projects, etc. That is not commonly approved for most students who request it at the college level. Again, this is just my impression from every time this comes up in my community. So the students who do get accommodated tend to be those with either a mental health, a psychological, or a physical disability specifically that has unexpected flare-ups. And that at the time of a paper that's due, if they have a flare-up, they can contact the professor and say, I am, not going to be able to finish this paper for tomorrow. But even they don't get what we call a blanket accommodation most of the time, where any time a paper is due, those students get, an extra 3 days. Now, I posted about this. I run a Facebook group, and somebody did say, oh, my student does have, falls into one of those two categories, but does get 1 to 3 days or whatever anytime a paper is due. So, I don't know everything, so I get that. But I think it's important to know that from what I can see, it is not commonly done. So that is why the assignment calculators are important, and sitting down with your student and saying, okay, so, the program has given you a bunch of deadlines. Let's get those onto your calendar. And now you have a weekend coming up. According to this, you have to have, read 5 sources. When are you going to do it? Because they need to have a part in figuring this stuff out, because that's what they'll be doing. And the other thing is it's often the same kinds of things they're doing in high school, but sort of on steroids. So they might have to read an entire novel in a week. And so there are accommodations for that. If they have a reading disorder or any kind of print-based disorder, we'll get them the materials that they need in an accessible format. What we don't have to do, going back to the earlier part of this conversation, is provide them with text-to-speech software, which would read it aloud to them. So all we have to do is make sure that the things they need to read can be read by that kind of technology. But we don't have to do that. They're going to have to get used to writing long papers. So, another difference that we can talk about is generally at the college level, we don't modify assignments. Students have to meet the same performance standards as their typical classmates. So they're not going to get to write a shorter paper typically. They need to be taking the same kinds of tests as their classmates, because we generally don't say, oh, you struggle with multiple choice tests, you can do a short answer instead.
Right. So parents really need to help their kids start planning academically in high school so that they'll be able to do it in college once they get there. And I'm in love with this homework calculator. I'm going to get one of those.
That's pretty
a brilliant
cool,
thing. I think I need that for my entire life. But
yeah, hey, why not?
But anyway, so it sounds like that is one thing. And, the parents really need to just try to emphasize with kids is you're going to have to do this on your own. The demands may be harder, and so how are they going to be prepared for that? Now, you mentioned like some schools have programs that might be fee for service that provide more support. How can families find these programs, and how can, in general, families figure out what's going to be a good fit between a school and their specific student's disability?
So let me see where to start this conversation. So let's start with talking about fit. I'm a big fan of Rick Clark and Brennan Barnard, Fit and Match, right? So I want to caution people against thinking that if your student has a learning disability or ADHD or autism, you now have to focus their search on the few dozen colleges that provide these fee-based programs. Students are going to every kind of college that exists. They're going to engineering schools. They're going to art schools. They're going to highly selective / rejective schools. So, they run the gamut and they're doing fine, and, they don't require those programs. So, I think it's important to focus your search. And when I spoke to people for the book, what's interesting is the disability services directors themselves said, you guys need to find schools that work for your student, because if you send your student to a school that you have heard has a supportive disability services office, and that word means a million things to a million people, but they can't major in whatever they want because that school doesn't offer it, it's not a good fit. It's not a good match for them. So I think, to evaluate what level of support students need, hundreds of students are registered with disability services offices. And I'm just throwing that number out, but I had just looked at a study that said just that. And a lot of them are just getting accommodations. So they get the things that they need and they want to be left alone, frankly. One of the things to let them know is when they register with us, if they have to turn up at our offices physically, and they may never have to, just for that intake part of our process, they probably never have to visit the office again, or be on Zoom with their coordinator. All that stuff's going to happen electronically. So again, thousands, I guess, of students every year are just getting their extended time for exams. They're getting permission to record. Students are getting things like housing accommodations, some of them. Students are getting choices in the dining hall, that suit their needs if they have severe allergies or any kinds of, I don't know what the correct wording is to say, they have a need for a special diet. They're getting that stuff. And so to me, the fee-based programs, and you can find a list of them in the K&W guide to colleges for students with learning differences. In the back, there's a list of these couple of dozen colleges. I think if you have a student who is still receiving a lot of assistance from adults, they are probably a good candidate for a fee-based program. Or if it's a student who has only recently been identified as having a learning disability and has not had a chance to learn about that, learn strategies, that's probably who would benefit. But, the folks who run those programs, talk about who makes a good match for them. And, the really important thing is the student has to want to use the program.
Right. Well, and that is not a done deal, is my experience. There are a lot of kids who don't want to use the program, even though it might be, really helpful for them. And I've had students apply to some of these programs, and they're shocked that they have to do an interview or write an essay to get in. And I was saying, well, I think it's because they want to make sure that you're actually not going to waste their time or fight with them. You're going to show up. You have good reasons for going, and they want to make sure that you're going to participate.
Right. Because it can't just be the parent's idea.
Right.
And I think if you are having that conversation with your student, maybe, so let's back up a little bit. I think perhaps sometimes students may not be aware of how much support they're getting. It's seamless to them, perhaps. And so, when we talked earlier about what skills students need, I never want people to just say, oh, you're going to college next year, we're going to take all those supports away. Good luck to your kid. I think they need instruction in, whatever skills they need to strengthen. And it's hard. It is very hard to teach, for instance, students to take multiple choice tests, right? You can help them with some strategies, but they need to be in classes where the level of higher cognition, where they're on the level with their classmates as far as what they're expected to know and be able to do. So if you have a student who's getting a lot of assistance from adults, perhaps start by pulling some of that back and seeing how they do, because this may be the way that they start to realize how much others are doing for them and why you think it's a good idea for them to be in a program. And if they don't want to do it, that's a heavy parental conversation, I think.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting you make the point of that. I think a lot of kids, they go to really great schools and the schools do their job and they don't kind of even know that it's happening. And so maybe to remove one thing and see how that feels for a brief period of time might be something to be very instructive for a student in terms of what they might need in college. But yeah, I see this as an area of conflict a lot, between students and parents, because the parents are pretty clear, they've sort of been there the whole time. They've talked to the people who did the neuropsych testing and they talked to the school. So they might have like a more of a perspective on what the kid needs. But sometimes for things, let's say like ADD, insight is not a piece of that. So many people who have attention deficit disorder don't believe that they have it. If you talk to anyone around them, they'll be like, yeah, no, they definitely have it. I've been picking up their keys and putting it in their pocket all day long. And so that's really, I think that's where there's a tension, and that's hard.
I agree. And I think, one of my favorite books is Gift of Failure. And, I'm not, but don't let the title scare you. You've never heard of this book by Jessica Lahey. It's so wonderful. Not full on, failing out of high school, but, not driving the homework every time the student, forgets it, or the gym, the sneakers for gym. I think, and working with them then, there's some great books on executive functioning, the Smart But Scattered series of books. There are lots of resources, now, to help people figure out how to help their student, create these systems. But the students have to, there needs to be buy-in. And, we now know from science that the prefrontal cortex is not fully developed until well after our students are out of college.
Yeah.
We should probably hold them all off till they're 22 to get them started, but we're not going to do that.
Friends, this concludes part 2 of Lisa's interview with Liz Hamlet. Hope you join us next week for the final part. On Thursday's episode, first time we've ever had 5 people on one recording, but our entire In the News team of Julia, Susan, and Vince are joined by Hillary Dickman of Colorado College. We'll be discussing the Common App activity section do's and don'ts. It's a 3-part deep dive on what to do and what not to do. Julia and I will have a speak pipe question we'll answer, and then we'll have part 3 of Chris Cage, the VP of Enrollment at Belmont, helping us to understand Belmont University. And the spotlight will be our interview. And friends, I closed with something Gil Villanueva had on his desk. And it simply said this: wag more, bark less. I thought it was really powerful. So I did some research on what is the origin of this and what does it mean? Wag more, bark less. Well, I found out it's an ancient proverb that goes back to the Persians. Wag more, bark less is a phrase that encourages people to be more positive and less negative. It is often seen on bumper stickers and other forms of expression. The phrase uses a metaphor of a dog's tail wagging to indicate happiness and barking to indicate anger or dissatisfaction. My challenge to myself is also my challenge to all of us. Let's wag more, be more positive, and bark less. Less carping, griping, and complaining and negativity. See you on Thursday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stylianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.